watching the America 360 on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump will host leaders from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan at the White House today to strengthen ties. The summit aims to secure U.S. access to the region's vast uranium, copper, and rare earth reserves as Washington seeks to reduce dependence on Russia and China for critical minerals. More than 50 world leaders are gathered in Brazil's Amazon city of Belém for pre-COP30 climate summit, but the absence of China, the US, India, and Russia underscores the challenges of global unity on climate action. Brazilian President Lula da Silva led the talks, holding bilateral talks with UK leader Keir Starmer and France's Emmanuel Macron. The U.S. State Department has declared that Taiwan must be granted full and equal participation when China hosts the 2026 APEC summit in Shenzhen, rejecting Beijing's attempts to impose conditions under its One China policy. Taiwan, which participates in APEC as Chinese Taipei, accused Beijing of unfair restrictions. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has filed a complaint after being groped by a man in Mexico City. While the man is now under arrest, this incident has ignited national outrage over violence against women, as Sheinbaum, Mexico's first female president, has vowed to criminalize sexual harassment nationwide, as 821 femicides were recorded in 2024. Nancy Pelosi, the first and only female Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, has announced that she will not seek re-election after 38 years in Congress, closing a historic career that shaped Democratic politics for decades. Peru is reviewing whether to grant safe passage to former Prime Minister Betsy Chavez, who is sheltering in Mexico Embassy in Lima after receiving asylum following Peru's decision to sever diplomatic ties with Mexico. As Foreign Minister Hugo de Zila has said, a final decision is expected by the end of this week. The Federal Aviation Administration reduces flight capacity by 10% at 40 major airports. This move that could cut thousands of flights per day will go into effect on Friday morning, as per FAA. Pyongyang has condemned the Trump administration's new sanctions over cybercrimes funding its nuclear program, calling U.S. actions wicked hostility. Washington says North Korean hackers have stolen over $3 billion in digital assets to finance weapons development. Now we start with U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy has announced a 10% reduction in flights at 40 major airports due to air traffic control safety concerns amid the ongoing government shutdown, now on its 36th day. The cuts affecting major airports like those in New York, D.C., Chicago, and L.A. could reduce up to 1,800 flights and 268,000 seats. The shutdown has caused staffing shortages with 13,000 air traffic controllers and 50,000 TSA agents working without pay, leading to delays and safety risks. Airlines are making adjustments, prioritizing long-haul and hub-to-hub flights. Duffy has warned further restrictions could follow if the shutdown persists. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dan Perry. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us again. Good to see you. Dan, how does this ongoing U.S. government shutdown highlights the vulnerabilities in U.S. air traffic control and transport infrastructure? How should the federal government balance budgetary disputes while ensuring such public safety and working conditions for essential services?
There's not that much they can do. Air traffic controllers are deemed essential services, and therefore they cannot officially strike, and they have to go on without pay. This is the longest government shutdown in the history of the U.S., 36 days, I believe. And it shows no signs necessarily of ending anytime soon because of the nature of the incredibly partisan and ruthless dispute between the Republicans and the Democrats. The air traffic control issue in the U.S. is a long and painful one. In 1981, they attempted to strike for better conditions, and Reagan fired almost all of them, about 12,000 air traffic controllers, and the result was flight disruptions in the U.S. for, well, 5 years at least, and possibly in some ways a decade, while they retrained a whole new generation and used retired ones and military ones. People old enough still remember that. This is just one avatar of a bigger problem in the U.S. with the fact that you can even have this shutdown. And this attaches to something very bizarre in America, which is that to pass significant legislation, and that is what the appropriations bill that is meant to essentially implement the budget passed a few months ago, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, has to be passed by a supermajority in the Senate of 60 seats, and the Republicans only have 53. Now, I can think of no other country where no developed democracy, at least, where this happens. Generally, if you have a majority in the central main parliament, you can pass the budget. And if you don't pass the budget, then it runs at the run rate of the previous year. In America, funding stops, not for everything, but for a significant subsection of the government, and that includes the air traffic controllers, some of them, even though these are, as I said, deemed essential services. It is craziness that this can happen. It's very interesting that the Republicans are rejecting Trump's call to abolish the filibuster, which is a mechanism, this antiquated and quite remarkably exceptional mechanism that requires the supermajority. A simple majority can eliminate it. And the Republicans aren't doing this because they fear that would allow the Democrats to do whatever they might want next time the Democrats have a majority. The result is total government dysfunction. And I'm not sure there's a way to fix the problem with affected services without getting at the root of it, which is basically the filibuster. Now, the one last thing, the Republicans are blaming the Democrats for not providing them sufficient votes at 7 or 8 to pass their budget, or the implementation of their budget, the appropriations bill. And so Trump is running around saying it's the Democrats' fault, the Democratic far left, woke left, is causing all this to happen, which is causing food stamp benefits, for example, to be suspended. And in a sense, formally, that's true. If the Democrats had provided these additional votes, then there would be a supermajority for the budget. But that is a little bit ridiculous because the Democrats don't want to support this budget, which they consider to be a complete abomination. A case of stealing from the poor to pay for the rich. This under the big, beautiful bill, the average family earning almost $1 million would get tax breaks of almost $70,000. Meanwhile, billions in entitlements in healthcare and nutrition care for poor people. Tax breaks for poor people are expiring. I mean, it's hard to defend the big, beautiful bill, and therefore it's, well, nothing short of ugly in its level of popularity among the American people. I don't see how you get the Democrats to vote for that. And so we're at an impasse, and who knows, maybe some compromise will be arrived at. Inevitably, something eventually will, but with Trump in place, he's clearly goading the Republicans to give no quarter. And the result is, as I say, the longest ever government shutdown, and now this disruption to air traffic in the U.S.
Yes, Dan, building on your answer, what do you think this how is this affecting, the shutdown affecting the public confidence in the U.S. government's ability to manage critical infrastructure? And also, as you mentioned, this not in any developed democracy you've seen such things. So do you think they need to change something fundamentally?
Oh my God, yeah. I think the U.S. is full of exceptionalisms that are very, very bad, from the Electoral College to using the non-metric system. And as I say, Trump is right. For once, even a broken clock, twice a day is right. When he says abolish the filibuster, there's got to be a better way. The result is government dysfunction. And of course, to your question, it is devastating to the public's confidence in the government. A recent poll that came out just yesterday was shocking, showing that just over 30% trust the federal government. 52% consider Trump to be a dangerous dictator. And by the way, there's not that much more support for the Democratic Party either. There is grave American cynicism about their entire political class, and that is why you end up seeing populists from radical parts of the political wilderness end up in positions of power. Trump himself is that. 20 years ago, he already had somewhat hinted at political aspirations, and it was a joke that was referenced on The Simpsons. Now he's actually president as a reflection of the public sympathy to the idea that you just have to burn down the house, which is what he's doing, not only with the U.S. System and institutions, but the entire post-World War II liberal world order. He's taking a massive axe to it, if not a blowtorch. And this is done, enabled, his political victories are enabled by the fact that the public is indeed despondent. I don't think they've chosen wisely. He's burning down the wrong houses. But we saw it again in New York with Mamdani. Different problem with cost of living in an enormous world city, but it's of a piece. It's quite related to the general sense of despair about things as they have been and the status quo, and a feeling that something is desperately wrong and needs to change.
Yes, thank you, Dan. I really appreciate you sharing, connecting everything with your extensive knowledge and impressive knowledge. Thank you. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay in the region. The Trump administration has revoked around 80,000 non-immigrant U.S. visas since taking office in January this year, in what officials describe as part of a broader immigration crackdown. According to a senior State Department official, the offenses ranged from driving under the influence to assault and theft, with those three crimes accounting for nearly half of all revocations this year. The administration has also tightened visa screening, expanding social media vetting, and increasing background checks. Thousands of student visas have reportedly been cancelled for overstays, law violations, and even online comments. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had stated that this year that hundreds, perhaps thousands of visas were revoked over activities deemed against U.S. foreign policy, including support for Palestinians or criticism of Israel's actions in Gaza. Now we welcome back Dan Perry. He's a political analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for staying with us. Dan, could this focus on certain offenses or political activities for visa revocations create perceptions of bias or selective enforcement by current government?
Oh, I very much think it not only could create that impression, but definitely has created that impression. But this is a tremendously complex issue because you have certain political forces in the US and in Europe that believe that it is automatically racism to defend your borders, but the vast majority of the public doesn't think that. And it doesn't think that not just because of economic issues, but because of desire to not dilute too much the culture of a given country. And of course, others will say that to feel like you don't want to dilute your culture is racism. But the majority of the public doesn't feel this. So immigration is unpopular, both in Western Europe and in North America, where they sense that immigration is not some principle that everyone is being asked to accept, but it's a one-way street from the developing world to the developed world, which is understandable on economic grounds, but they don't feel that they don't necessarily need to allow it. So that's the political baseline. Now, with Trump, I mean, you know, he's on record as hating immigration, whether it's from Latin America that has been the main boogeyman, but also from the Muslim world. He banned immigration from a host of Muslim countries during his first term, but notably not Saudi Arabia, right? Which he needs for economic reasons. And the same applies to Africa. In the case of South Sudan, the premise is basically false. The war in South Sudan that created the legitimacy for these asylum requests has abated somewhat, but is not over. 300,000 people have been displaced so far in 2025 alone. So it's a little bit premature to suddenly yank all these visas because of that premise. But two things apply. One, Trump is eager to claim, even if it's premature, victory in, ending wars all over the world. And he's made this claim, as you well know, with India and Pakistan.
Yes.
In the case of Africa as well, in Central Africa. And in South Sudan, this enables them to message that their fantastically sophisticated diplomacy has ended that war, whereas in fact, it really has not. The other thing is, as I alluded to before, a somewhat racist dog whistle to the white nationalist base that cannot help but be pleased at the elimination of the source of unwanted immigration from the underdeveloped part of the world.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Dan Perry for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we have a breaking news. A Sudanese parliamentary group has agreed to humanitarian truce proposed by U.S.-led mediators. The RSF's agreement to the proposal comes over a week after the group seized El Fasher city that has been under siege for over 18 months. It was also the last Sudanese military stronghold in the Sudan's western Darfur region. Reports suggest that the army will only agree to a truce which includes withdrawing from civilian areas and giving up weapons. Now we go back to U.S. Nancy Pelosi, the first and only female Speaker of the U.S. House, has announced that she will not seek re-election after nearly 40 years in Congress. In a heartfelt message, she reflected on her historic career serving as San Francisco's voice in Washington and advocating for American ideals. Pelosi, who is 85 years old now, was a key figure in passing landmark legislation, including the Affordable Care Act, and led historic impeachments of President Trump. Known for her sharp political tactics and iron grip on the House, she recently achieved a major win with California's redistricting ballot measure. Pelosi's legacy includes breaking barriers for women in politics, navigating party polarization, and enduring personal tragedies like the attack on her husband. Now for this discussion, we welcome Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, Raymond, for joining us again. Good to see you. Raymond, now looking at this, how will Nancy Pelosi's retirement after nearly 40 years in Congress impact this future direction and leadership of Democratic Party? What legacy does she leave behind, if you can remember any moments from her career, if you would like to share with us?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I believe that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker Emeritus of the House of Representatives, harkens back and represents a different time in American history when the constitutional checks and balances were very much a part of the scene. Now we have a legislative branch in the House particularly, but also in the Senate, completely in thrall to President Trump. It's not a question of exercising any independent judgment. I believe that Nancy Pelosi's greatest achievement, of course, was in the Affordable Care Act and what she did in close cooperation with President Obama. But just as important was her opposition to George W. Bush in terms of the invasion of Iraq and a consistent international position that the United States had an obligation to lead for democratic values across the spectrum. Representative Pelosi is now 85, as you point out. She has 5 children, 9 grandchildren. And I think what's weighed on her personally most is the attack on her husband, Paul, who was nearly killed for political reasons, hit with a hammer. I think she feels a deep obligation in terms of her marriage. She's been married to him for over 52 years, and it's time for her to step back attend to his still medical and physical needs as well as the rest of her family. So this is indeed a landmark lady, not only in terms of advancing equal rights for women, but standing up for rights in the LGBTQ community, and harkens back to a time in which the Congress of the United States could perform its constitutional duty as being a co-equal branch of government and not just a rubber stamp for the president.
And how do you think, how will her exit signal, does this signal like a generational shift in U.S. politics, and how might it affect the Democrats' strategy ahead of the 2026 midterm elections?
Well, I think that she has made her mark. We've had two women elected governors in Virginia and New Jersey. She has paved the way for women to be in leadership roles across the government. So she has made her mark, and I do believe that the new governor of Virginia and in New Jersey particularly will further her legacy in that regard. She has been a liberal. I think that what has happened in New York City indicates that liberalism is alive and well in the Democratic Party. Unfortunately, her skills in building a coalition are going to be greatly missed. She was a person that was able to work with all factions in the Democratic Party. And at this point, we're still in the Democratic Party looking for a leader that has the ability to pull together the Spanbergers, the Mondamis, the different factions of the Democratic Party. I do think that she is going to be missed in that regard.
Right. Thank you very much, Raymond, for sharing that insight. All the way from Washington, D.C., please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now moving on to New Jersey, 3 New Jersey's men have been arrested in connection with a terror plot investigation. This comes just after arrests were made in Michigan in an alleged ISIS-inspired plot. The New Jersey men were apparently part of the same online communication group as the Michigan suspects. While they did not discuss a common plot, they shared their own separate schemes. Now, one of the suspects is charged with conspiring to provide material support to a designated terrorist organization, while the second is charged with sending violent anti-Semitic threats across the internet. Both suspects had also reportedly intended to travel to Syria to join ISIS. According to police authorities, the suspects used encrypted messaging apps to discuss detailed plans, including travel, physical training, weapons, and ways to evade law enforcement. Now we move on to our next news. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton asks a state judge to block Kenvue from paying a nearly $400 million shareholder dividend this month, after suing the drug maker for allegedly concealing risks to children from the use of Tylenol by pregnant women. According to Paxton, who is also a Republican, says that Kenvue must conserve cash because it faces billions of dollars of potential damages related to both Tylenol and to international lawsuits, claiming that baby powder containing talc causes cancer. He has also said that paying the scheduled November 26 dividend, which according to a regulatory filing would total about $398 million, that would violate a Texas law against fraudulent transfers. This comes as Kimberly-Clark is set to buy Kenvue, the maker of Tylenol, earlier, which has faced attacks from the White House on Wednesday. Kenvue shares closed nearly 23% below the takeover price, a sign some investors believe the merger might not be completed on the original terms. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Raymond, for staying with us. Now, Raymond, looking at this, what more can you tell us about this news, and what legal and ethical responsibilities do corporations have to shareholders versus public safety in such case?
Well, thanks very much for letting me comment on this. Unfortunately, this action by the Texas Attorney General is a part and parcel of what has happened since the Trump administration has come into power. And that is an attack on scientific reasoning in regard to drugs and health on a political basis rather than looking at the evidence. We've seen this with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the attack on vaccines, not only for COVID-19, but for measles, and now moving on to a theory which is unproven about Tylenol and autism. Unfortunately, there is a base in the MAGA movement to make America healthy again, which ascribes difficult scientific problems to political machinations which really do not exist. So what the Texas Attorney General is doing is part and parcel of this, trying to make political hay out of something which should be considered on its scientific merits. Most of all the experts in this area who have looked at the studies find that there is not the causal connection which is fundamental to being able to say that there is liability. And of course, what Attorney General in Texas is doing is getting ahead of the science and leaping to the conclusion that there is some causal connection, and then trying to use the mechanisms for corporate governance to cripple the companies involved. It is, of course, absolutely the case that corporations who deal in drugs, in vaccines, have an obligation to the public and not just to the shareholders to make as much money as they can. But that obligation has to be seen in the light of scientific evidence and not those who would try to make political hay out of theories which are unproven. Unfortunately, President Trump has taken up the cry against Tylenol. He has designated himself a medical expert, if you will, advising people who have need for Tylenol and not to take it. And of course, that does vast harm, because for a long time now, Tylenol in certain areas has been the drug of choice to be able to ameliorate various medical problems. So this is a part and parcel of the attack on rational medical approaches and substituting for that a political agenda which is now being furthered by the Texas Attorney General.
Right. Thank you very much, Raymond, for sharing all that. We thank Raymond Vickery for joining us as a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, all the way from U.S. And that's a wrap on America 360. Keep watching NewsX.